whose side of the story, which story is told, how it's told, and when it's told, of course, is the whole ballgame. Okay, we're going to talk about the most discussed and most investigated misdemeanor assault case in the history of the Manhattan DA's office. That would be Jonathan Majors' case, man. There was a news story in the New York Times alleging more people coming out on Jonathan Majors. The takeaway here is, or the takeaways here are pretty interesting and obvious. One is that, traditionally in the media is supposed to be the folks who are actually analyzing the government. The government in this case, of course, is the Manhattan DA's office, as run in this case by Alvin Bragg. But in this example, what we see is the media teaming up with the Manhattan DA's office in the Majors case. That's really not that surprising. It's not new. It's not new that you see situations where you say to yourself, gee, I wonder where they got the information that's in this story. They must have gotten it from the government. In this case, likely the Manhattan DA's office. That's not new. There's nothing new about that. I see a lot of people writing about it, but really most stories that you see, particularly in the bigger newspapers that one might go to carry their narrative, are the result of a tip. It's the result of someone telling them that that's what's going on. What makes this particularly interesting, of course, is that Jonathan Majors was supposed to be sentenced on February 6th, which is this past Tuesday, February 6, 2024. Today is February 9th, 2024. The story drops on February 8, 2024 in the New York Times. So what that kind of says to me is that the level of coordination, of course, is linked to the timing, because one of the motions that Jonathan Majors' attorney dropped this week had to do with the facts around squashing Molyneux testimony, which is testimony from other people who have nothing to do with this specific case, which, of course, is focused on his ex-girlfriend, Miss Grace Jabbari. And this is something, in my view, that you see when a case is weak, because when a case is strong, you don't really need to bring anybody else into it. But the fact of the matter is, this case is kind of a joke. And when it's brought together with the Kevin Porter case and brought together with the Adam Foss case, the Adam Foss case was a gigantic flop for the Manhattan DA's office, then you can't have another flop right after that, particularly when you're involving 3 black males. And it's very obvious to everybody that there's a pattern developing in the Manhattan DA's office. And yet 2 very flimsy cases with the Adam Foss case and the Kevin Porter case. In the Kevin Porter case, his girlfriend, who was supposedly the victim, who was not the victim, according to her, of anything, was out on television saying that she had problems with the Manhattan DA's office.
They've already offered this man a plea deal of no jail time that they didn't report, but they have it out in the general public and to the media that he's still facing 2 charges. There's so much information that they're withholding because they are refusing to take accountability for their actions and manipulating this entire case to catapult their own injustice.
So that was problematic. And of course, there was a, quote, plea deal. There should have never been a thing in the first place with Kevin Porter. Once again, these 3 cases involving Jonathan Majors, Kevin Porter, and Adam Foss, you'll notice that none of the people who allegedly were the victims actually contacted law enforcement, the police, or the Manhattan DA's office. In the case of Mr. Foss, the Manhattan DA's office is the one that it was the main instigator of the entire case. In the case of Porter, I think it was the hotel that called the authorities, but it was not the person, the ex-girlfriend, which you would think would be the more likely person, or even just a friend of the ex-girlfriend.
File the complaint on behalf of whom?
We are legally required to file a complaint within a certain amount of hours.
On behalf of whom? This is why. On behalf of whom? And I'm asking you a question. On behalf of whom?
On behalf of the people of the state of New York. This is the job that we do.
And in the case of Majors, it was actually Jonathan Majors who called the police. And of course, the police get to his penthouse and decide that he's the villain. What a surprise. So at any rate, I think that it's clear that there's coordination. I mean, if there's not coordination between the media and the Manhattan DA's office, I would be very surprised. It's kind of clear. It's almost sort of out in the open, really. I mean, it is, because there's certain information I think that only the DA's office would know. And I'm not saying that a media organization can't call everybody's girlfriend. All you have to do is get the Yale yearbook, find out where everybody is, these people in their 30s, and call them. But there's something about some of the writing in these pieces that makes me say that there is a high level of coordination. But, you know, I could be wrong, but I'm just saying it is very interesting to watch that because, again, most news organizations brag about how they're supposed to be the watchdog of the government. In this case, you have just the opposite. Everyone has joined together to be the watchdog of John Majors. So now we're investigating every single relationship, every single conversation he's had on set at some movie, every single encounter with somebody, really women. I mean, it's not really, notice that they're not really interested in men. Apparently, I guess he gets along great with every man he's ever met. But at any rate, it is interesting to see the level of investigation, the level of attention on a misdemeanor assault case. But I think, as everybody knows, this is not just a misdemeanor assault case. This is a high level case that's in the media that People magazine and Variety and Rolling Stone and the New York Times are writing about all the time. Now, one good thing about that New York Times piece, which I've been critical of the Rolling Stone on, at least they have named people. Okay, so you have a named individual. This idea that we talked to 40 people, which is what Rolling Stone did. Oh, we talked to 40 people, but none of them will give a name. You know, come on. But Jonathan Majors is not Bumpy Johnson. Okay, he is not a gangland leader who's killed 20 people, and we're talking about a mafia case. We're talking about a movie actor with zero history, zero arrest, nothing. And then all of this happens because, of course, I suspect that, you know, with a lot of people in Hollywood, you could find a story very easily of he yelled at me on set. I mean, we got this case with Baldwin where Alec Baldwin shot somebody on a set. So, I mean, it's kind of like, I'm not really, it's interesting how that now is in a piece as one of the people. And you also see in these pieces too, that headlines are huge because most people don't read past the headline. They're not going to read into the detail of the story, right? They're not going to really think about, well, you know, whether or not, or what proves something to be accurate or not. But again, I'm seeing at least some progress on at least their names. Okay. I mean, there's actual names of people. It's also interesting to see that, you know, whoever these people were, they did not want to discuss it or did not want to give their names to the Rolling Stone, but they did give their names to the New York Times. And, you know, that may be related, who knows, to the fact that, of course, the Rolling Stone magazine was sued for a completely fake RAPE story back in 2015 that was based at the University of Virginia. That fake story, the Rolling Stone, of course, was sued for and lost in court big time. And so maybe there was a feeling amongst the folks that they didn't want to talk to the Rolling Stone and talk to the New York Times. Okay, but at least the reporter at the New York Times got actual names. Okay, so that was interesting. So at any rate, it cues up, as you would think, when you have a case that, again, has no evidence other than, you know, again, I would say that most people, the posture that they should take with all of these things that are unknowable. So when you're dealing with things that, oh, it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago or whatever in particular, I assume everybody is lying, and then I go from there. Okay, that's just my thing. I mean, but I know a lot of journalists don't do that, particularly with Me Too journalism. What they do is they assume that all the women are telling the truth and all the men are liars and all the men are perpetrators and the women are victims. That's just how most Me Too reporting goes, particularly at the New York Times. So, and Rolling Stone. So I get that. But if you looked at the Jabbari case, the Jabarri Majors case, we really didn't need to listen to John Majors or Grace Jabbari. All we needed to do was look at video and look at text messages and look at audio. And there were recordings. And you remember the famous recording of the Coretta Scott King recording. And I'm thinking, okay, this paints a picture. This entire thing paints a picture of what this relationship is. It kind of, like I said, reminds me of the Johnny Depp situation. Amber Heard, like we got to see videos and we got to see pictures and we got to see where everybody was. And of course, in-person testimony, which I think is probably the most valuable thing. And as I've said before, I think John Majors made a mistake not testifying. I think you have to tell your story. You cannot allow, and particularly if you're a Black male in the justice system, you cannot allow other people to tell your story. Now, he did get out there for ABC, but to me, he should have gotten out there under oath in court and said, this is what this was. Most relationships, it takes two to tango. Both people generally make mistakes. It's very rare that you hear a story where one person is completely wrong and the other person is completely right. Usually you've got two people who should not be in a relationship with each other, and it's a disaster. That's typically, but certainly it would never be okay that anybody hits anybody. It would never be okay that anybody throws somebody, across the room or anything. I'm not assuming that anything is true, though, as we've seen people talk before, and I know the Rolling Stone knows what I'm talking about. I tell them a whole big story about how the glass on the coffee table in the frat house broke and all this, and none of it was true. So you got to be careful, and particularly in an era where people understand that they can get nationally platformed by telling a story. And the media doesn't really care about that, by the way. We live in a media era where what the media cares about is web traffic. And it will do anything to get that web traffic, in my view. But again, at least the New York Times piece does reference what they're defining as certainly evidence, which was, it was like a diary entry thing, or at least there's some reference to it. I mean, I've seen stories, and again, we typically, particularly at the New York Times, have seen stories where they're not even mentioning the name of the accuser. I mean, just a few weeks ago, we had the mayor of New York sued. And it turned out that the person filing the suit had 3 and 4 of the lawsuits on Churchill Downs and American Airlines or Delta Airlines and the city of Miami-Dade. So is that person credible? I would say no. But in that moment, that all went into the paper because somebody filed the suit. Now, of course, with legal action, it's very common, and I think very expected, that media will relay that somebody filed a lawsuit. But you got to understand, in the civil suit, you're shielded. The civil suit information is shielded it's shielded from defamation. So you can basically say whatever you want in a civil suit. But to get back to John Majors, you can see the coordination. You can see that I just think that this whole moment is brought to you by the fact that the evidence in the Jabbari case was extremely weak. And particularly when you see a man running from the person, trying to get away from her, trying to put her in the car, turn away and run. You saw that again and again. We saw all the signs that it was Jonathan Majors trying to get out of the space of Grace Jabbari. We saw that again and again. And the evidence that we saw was hard evidence. It was not him talking or him saying it or, oh, I'm claiming that this is what happened. We could see it for ourselves on the video. We could see video of him at a hotel far away from her. We could see him running away from her in a way that I think was, said to me that this is not somebody who wants to get into a confrontation with somebody. And having seen all that, he still gets rung up for misdemeanor assault. So I just, it is an amazing thing, the way the justice system works for this particular constituency, Black men. It is undeniable. And you see that again, as I've said in previous videos, there is another jury that's involved, not just the jury that was in the courtroom, but now you have the jury of the media, which has always been a certain way. And only really represented by a certain group of people, and not a whole lot of Black folks in there at all. Certainly not a whole lot of Black men in there at the New York Times. I know Mark Lacey is there, but, I think that it's safe to say that a jury of his peers never seems to happen, whether it's inside of court or outside of court. And it's not surprising. I mean, this is the typical thing, but it is interesting to watch the level of coordination between the Manhattan DA's office and the media. Not really surprising, but interesting. And the timing is interesting. It was almost as if they were not particularly happy that Majors' attorney, Priya Chaudhry, had filed some motions. I mean, it feels like that's what really has got them sort of ticked off. So they're sort of like, okay, we got something for you. We're going to put this out there. And I guess these are the Molyneux witnesses. I guess we can certainly assume that, but can't really confirm it. And that's it. Good luck. There'll be more, and I'm sure there'll be more. I think the new sentencing date is March. And hopefully there won't be anything outside the ordinary on that. But this entire case has been outside the ordinary. The fact that the case was in court was outside the ordinary. So why wouldn't the sentencing be outside the ordinary? I'll be back soon.